Hello everyone, Dr. Shabazz here, and today I will be covering the material from Chapter 12, which is Global Marketing. You will notice when I begin playing the content that it was shot previously. In fact, it was last semester that I shot this video, but the content is the same and I have some very good examples for you. Now, we're moving toward the end of the semester, and I know it's been difficult for you to keep focus. We all are suffering from what is called Zoom fatigue. That is a thing. You can Google it. There are all kinds of studies being done as we go through this trying period. And hopefully come the fall semester of 2021, we will be headed back to some normalcy as far as the in-person instruction is concerned. But that being said, we still have to get through this semester. We have a little bit over a month. We have a major project that will constitute the end of the semester with the presentation that will be done in April. And so you want to make sure that you're engaged, if for nothing else, to make sure that you nail this project because it constitutes a good portion of the grade. So what I have asked is for each of the groups that have been established randomly, and I have also given each group a region. From that region, you are to choose a country, and that country will be the subject of your research and, of course, your analysis. This Thursday, we will have the introduction of these countries. Each group will have about 5 minutes to introduce the country to the class, and you will give a profile, and it will be just an idea of the country itself, maybe some facts about the country, and you might throw in some current events, you might throw in some fun facts, business etiquette, and that's all we need to get started on this. This will also give you a chance to get moving on your preliminary analysis, which I will be asking for a draft in a couple of weeks. After that draft is completed, you will then choose a product, and then that product will go through a process of adaptation to the country that you have selected and also the market that you have identified. So it is a methodical process. And many of these consulting companies engage in these activities. So this is actually a real live project that you're going to do. So what you will have that will follow is I will talk about the process a little bit more, and then I will begin covering material in Chapter 12. At the end, I have a video on China, and it is titled China Rising. And this gives you an idea of some of the marketing issues that you have to face when you're in a country like China. The video is some years old. There are many other videos on China, but this has a lot of good examples, good instructive material. And it also focuses on a company that we all know, a big retail company, and I won't tell you the name of the company, but you probably can guess which one it is. But we will see this company's challenges in the country of China. So what will follow is I will go through some more material dealing with the project, and then the chapter coverage will follow. Okay? Take breaks when you need them, and make sure that you're finishing strong and participating in your group projects. Okay? See you later on in the week, and Thursday we will have the introductions of the countries. Take care. Hello everyone, Dr. Shabazz here, and I'm going to be covering material in chapters 12 and 13. Chapter 12 is dealing with global marketing, and chapter 13 is dealing with distribution and supply chain management. Both of these are very, very important topics, particularly when you talk about the 4 Ps. The idea of promotion is extremely important. And when you go overseas, there are the 4 Ps, but there are a number of different elements that you have to deal with. Now, for your project, you're assessing a foreign market. Let's say, for example, I'm a company and I hire your company, a consulting firm, to do an assessment for the country that you're researching. And let's say that I have an idea that I may want to enter that market. Now, you as the consulting firm will have to go and conduct that assessment, which means you would have to make a number of visits to officials, trade officials. You would have to make visits to people in the commerce, the local business community. They have all types of trade experts, people on the ground that can help you to get an idea of how to acclimate to that market. When I've been on trips overseas with groups of faculty members, we're often briefed by a number of different people in the commercial industry, including the American Embassy. And they give us all the different rules and the regulations, things like taxes, repatriation of capital, currency controls. All of these things are, of course, very important. But when you are marketing abroad, there are a different set of rules in terms of what's accepted, which also includes culture. Now, many of those elements that you're researching, the political, legal, economic, financial, social, cultural, technological, human resource management, competitive environment is also another one. Geographic is another one. In your assessment, you have to give me a geographic setting. Where is this country located exactly? Is it a landlocked country? Does it have a shoreline? How long is the shoreline? Where is it in proximity to other nations? This makes a big difference in terms of Chapter 13 when you talk about shipping, getting your product from point A to point B. So looking at the international markets, let's be honest that a company will not consider going overseas unless there's an incentive. Why would you go overseas? What are some of the reasons? Well, essentially the reason is that you want to expand your market reach and you want an opportunity to gain greater revenue. That's the main reason. There may be some other strategic reasons, such as looking at the competition. And because competition overseas may have expanded, then they have legitimized that market, which makes it ripe for competition. One of the other reasons that you might seek going abroad is because your factors of production may be cheaper. We're not only talking about labor, but we're also talking about materials. The raw materials that you need or through procurement, your suppliers, the materials that you need to make the products that you're making, and thus moving production overseas can give you access to those markets in that region. So those are some basic reasons when you start talking about market potential. And what you do when you look at market potential, you look at things like your demographics. You look at population. You look at population density. You look at age distribution. You look at income distribution. You look at propensity to save. You look at a lot of these elements that gives you an idea of market potential. And then you also look at sales potential, where you have to make it a little bit more narrow to that market that is going to be interested in purchasing your product. So sales potential is defined in the book as the percentage of a market potential. So it is a percentage of the total that a specific company expects to sell in a specific international market. Following, you have different types of markets. Now, when we talk about digital marketing, we always talk about this matrix where you have B2C, which is business to consumer. You have C to B, consumer to business. You have B2B, which is business to business. And you have C to C, which is consumer to consumer. And these are all elements when you talk about the exchange of products in the market. So you have your consumer market, where you have your normal types of products, food, clothing, transportation, and then your services. You have your business market, your industrial market. We talk about B2B again. Equipment and machinery, supplies, lubricants, consulting services, cleaning services are all in that category. But then you have another element that's covered in some classes, B2G. So you have some governments need airplanes, they need uniforms, they need other types of electronic equipment that may go inside of an airplane. And so you have government contractors. So you have a various markets that when you go overseas, you have to look at these options in terms of what is the segment that I'm after? Who are the people that I'm targeting? What types of products do I have? And thus you can make the right choice in terms of which market that you're seeking. So how do you make these decisions? Well, again, I mentioned that you look at the demographics. Here they talk about population, income levels, GDP per capita, which is GDP divided by the population. Now, what does that assume? It assumes that you have equal distribution, right? Because you're dividing GDP by the population. Now, there are some caveats. When you divide GDP by the population, it assumes an equal distribution. But such a society does not exist. There's no society that exists currently that has an equitable distribution. Some countries may have more of an equitable distribution than others, but you don't have a country that has equitable distribution. There tends to be a lot of segments. And then you have, of course, this in grad school, what they call a Lorenz curve, which gives you the idea, the percentage of income versus the percentage of population. So it's these two axes that you measure. A 1% of the population would control 1% of the income. 2% of the population should control 2% of the income. 50% should control 50% of the income. That would be an equitable distribution. That would be a perfect correlation. But typically you have, for example, in a lot of countries, you have the top 5% that may control 50 to 60% of the nation's wealth. As you find in this country where you have the top 1% that controls a very large percentage of the national income. So you have income distribution. You have the age, when you start talking about the age distribution, how young is your population? In the other side of outsourcing, we saw a case study on India, and they had a distinction of not only being primarily a vegetarian nation, 40%, don't eat beef. Those are two very uncommon things, and also predominantly Hindu. But what is the other thing? Is that their population is very young, with over 50% under the age of 25. And so when you look at that distribution, you're thinking, okay, what kind of products am I going to market to India? You might think in terms of demographics. Maybe I'll go after the younger generation because their incomes are increasing and they have more buying power. So those are maybe some things that you'll look at. You'll look at the nation's ethnicity and religions. I just mentioned Hinduism, and India also has other major religions such as Buddhism and Islam. India represents the second largest Muslim population on the planet, behind which country? And you probably cannot guess this, but the largest Muslim country in terms of population on the planet is Indonesia. It is the largest Muslim country in the world. India has the second largest, and you have other large nations of Muslim populations, such as Nigeria, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Turkey. Most of these Muslim adherents are not in the Middle East, and most of them do not speak Arabic as their first language. That's a misnomer that we often hear about Muslims. We think about the Middle East, we think about Arabs, but of course the Muslim population is exceedingly diverse. And these are some things that you would know if you're researching a country that's in that region. It's important to know these tidbits, and these are things you would find out in your research. You also want to look at where that market is situated. Is it in an urban area? Is it in a rural area? This makes a difference for a lot of reasons, most notably distribution. If you're in an urban area, typically you're going to have a higher population density. You're going to have more of a market reach because you're able to reach more people through the media, or say through a billboard or through some advertisement, than you would if you're in a rural area where things are very much spread out. So again, these are some things that you would look at in terms of your research. Looking at the per capita GDP here, you have Qatar at the top, $102,100 per year per person. I have traveled to Qatar. It is a very wealthy country. When I traveled there more than 10 years ago, they were still building. There were a lot of building projects. They were using a lot of Filipino workers. A lot of migrant labor were building these structures. And I talked to a former SBI colleague, who's a professor there at Carnegie Mellon, and I actually went to Qatar to visit. And he was saying the last time you were here, Qatar has changed by leaps and bounds. And he furthermore said you wouldn't recognize the place. And you can just see the potential that that country has because they're awash in oil revenue, and a country that is about, in terms of population, the same as Jamaica, around 2.7 million, 2.8 million. So a very small country and very wealthy. You'll notice some of the other countries on the list: Liechtenstein, Monaco, Luxembourg. Those are some of the countries that were mentioned in the Giant Beast that is called the Global Economy, the video that we watched. And these are offshore territories that are a safe haven for a lot of tax shelters, not to mention Switzerland, which you see as number 7 on that list in terms of wealth. And then you have some others: Singapore. I've been to Singapore, I've been to Norway. Countries are doing very well. It's very expensive in those places, but certainly the cost of living would probably negate any type of savings that you think you'll have because of the exchange rate. In addition, you have some of the others. Brunei, you might not know much about, a Buddhist nation that is in Asia. And I believe at one time they had the richest man in the world. I don't know if that's still the case. Then you have some other, the usual countries. The United States is punching in at number 9. The Netherlands and then Canada, our northern neighbor, are also in the top, the upper echelon. I might also say, and if you will allow me to go back just a couple of slides, I want to say something about demographics, or not just demographics, but I want to point to another metric that is often used to assess nations. You look at demographics, you look at things like GDP per capita, you look at income distribution, but there is a particular metric that's very important. And if you will allow me to show you, it is called the Human Development Index. And this was something I remember from graduate school, and then they came out with these reports every year, and they would update these reports. And what these reports did was it looked at the social health of a country. So it not only were you to look at the economic stability of a country, you also to look at the social stability of a country. So what is this Human Development Index? And this is the link that I'm showing you here to the United Nations Development Program that puts out these reports. And here, if you read under the heading that the HDI was created to emphasize that people and their capabilities should be the ultimate criteria for assessing the development of a country, not the economic growth alone. The HDI can also be used to question national policy choices, asking how two countries with the same level of GNI, gross national income, per capita can end up with different human development outcomes. So what is this HDI? What does it consist of? You see down the bottom, it is measuring health is one, knowledge attainment is another, and also standard of living. So if you look, I'm going to go to another website, and if we go down on this site, it has the same points here, which they took from the organization: long, healthy life, access to education, and a decent standard of living. So how exactly is that defined? If we look at further down, we'll see a color-coded map that gives you an indication of some of these metrics, and they even have graphs. So of course the United States and Canada look very good at 0.93, 0.92 for the United States. This is out of 1, 0 to 1. And if you look at some of these other regions, they don't fare so well. Brazil at 0.76. You look at some of the African nations, 0.4, 0.437, 0.37. Russia is 0.82. India is 0.64. Australia is 0.94. So you see how the rankings play out. They also have tables in alphabetical order. Other sources, life expectancy, you see, years of schooling, gross national income per capita. And you also have things such as maternal mortality, infant mortality, literacy rates are all part of these metrics. So let's look at a few other things before I move forward. They have a lot of graphs here showing you how the Human Development Index has evolved over time, and you see how some of these nations had developed. Going forward, and you actually see South Korea at the top, and you see the progress they have made. So you have a lot of valuable information here, and then you could actually click and it takes you down to these categories: life expectancy. And again, these are color coded. We have a life expectancy here of 78.9 years. Canada is 82.4. Europe has, as you can see, a lot of longevity, as does Australia. But if you look at the African continent, you have a lot of countries who have a life expectancy of 60 years, 60. In Latin America, about 10, 15 years more. So these are things you have to look at. If you're doing an assessment of a country, these are the factors that you would examine. I just wanted to make mention of that. So how do you get your research? Now, the book gives you these ways of getting your research. They give some useful tables, which we will go over. But you have marketing research, and we all know from marketing different elements of research. You've got your surveys, you've got your interviews, you've got your focus groups, you've got consumer panels. You have a number of different ways in which you can collect that data. You also have observational techniques that you can use for exploratory studies, which then you can form a hypothesis to test in a more rigorous way. So you have that element of marketing intelligence. You also have information collected over a period of time so that you can develop patterns and you can maybe develop some type of framework for addressing that particular market. Going forward, this is the information needed. So it's a lot of information. If you were doing your project for real, say you were the consulting company and you're doing, let's say you're doing Singapore, and someone wanted an assessment of Singapore, and they wanted to know, what is the prospects of me doing business in Singapore in, let's say, 6 months to a year? What are the prospects? You would go, you would conduct your research after having traveled over there. But what are you looking at? You're looking at all of these things, examples of information needed from a marketing information system. Packaging, marketing, labeling. You're looking at regulations there. Psychographic information. Here we're talking about attitudes, beliefs, opinions, personalities, socio-demographic. Now here you're talking about where people are situated, population density, industry data sales, specific perception of products, a whole wide range of information that you would need to collect normally. Now we're doing a stripped down version of a much more comprehensive model, and that's just to give you a taste of how this research would go. You have a matrix here. You have internal information that you can gather, both secondary data that you can find internally to the company, financial and accounting data that you've collected over a period of time, and then you have external secondary data, which most of you collect. For this project, you have to do journal articles that will make up these environmental factors or uncontrollables. And you would most likely get those from periodicals, from online publications. You can get them from newspapers and bulletins, other kinds of published reports. Now, primary, we know the difference between secondary and primary, right? Primary is data that are collected for the first time. So you have to conduct your surveys, your interviews, you have to conduct your own study. That means your data are not only original, but it's customized to suit your problem precisely. Unlike secondary data, which is available, but it might not fit your particular situation. So you have internal primary data that you can collect through company marketing research department. Companies' sales force may have that data from their sales. And then you have external primary data. Trade shows, going to trade shows and actually getting information from players in that industry, conventions and meetings, company advertising agencies, and other channels of distribution, and consultants like yourself. So these are the ways that you can collect and procure information so you can make those types of assessments. This is called a marketing intelligence system. The big question here, we're almost at the half-hour mark. The big question when you're going abroad, should you standardize or should you adapt? You've got a couple different choices to make. If you standardize, that means you take your product as is. Maybe some minor changes, and some will say if you just change the language, that's not considered adaptation. Those are just basic baseline things that you have to do. But it says here, marketing strategies used in international markets are the same as those used in the firm's domestic market. So things such as your pricing strategy may be similar, your promotion may be similar, and you may even use the same slogans. But in adaptation, that means you have to look at all those factors, the ones that you're researching through the journal articles, and you have to make some adjustments to your product based upon the differences between your home country and the country that you're going to. Obviously, we've studied cross-cultural business, and we understand that when you go into another environment, there are some differences, which means that you may have to make some adjustments to your 4 Ps. You may have to make some adjustments to pricing. You may have to make some adjustments to promotion. Certain things may not be allowed. There's certain humor that is not going to be accepted. You may have to make some changes in how people get things, unconventional ways. You may make some changes to the product itself, maybe changing the ingredients, changing the packaging, because the climate may be different. These are all things that you have to consider. Glocalization means a combination of both, is that you keep some elements of standardization, but then you also infuse local practices, local customs, things that the locals will be familiar with. It is defined as a marketing strategy that involves pursuing a standardization strategy when possible and an adaptation one when necessary. So you have kind of a case-by-case basis, but it's kind of a mixture of strategies. So here are your options. Sell the same domestic product overseas, to be standardization. Modify products for different countries and different regions. That's more of a multinational approach. You're choosing countries and you're changing based upon where you are. You can develop new products for foreign markets, and you can develop a global product by taking all product differences into one design and develop a global product, a standardized product. So you have a lot of options. So here are the steps for developing new products, and these are actually similar steps that you would find in your Principles of Marketing book. In fact, in our marketing class, we have just gone over this. Also in chapter 12, and you have similar steps here. Slightly different, but it's pretty much the same. It's the terminologies are slightly different. But the first one is you develop ideas. That's obvious. You screen those ideas. You look at the ideas you have, you evaluate them and you screen them. And then you begin to test the ones that you have chosen. And then you start crunching the numbers. You look at obviously revenues and profits. Is this thing profitable? Is it going to make money? You develop prototypes. Then you go into they say market testing. In the marketing book, they say test marketing, where those are synonymous. But in the final analysis, you're moving towards commercialization. So that is going to be the path toward developing new products. Here you have another graph. This is exhibit 12.3 in the book. That would be page 295. They have a nice little chart here. I actually have one of my own that I would like to draw. I probably will get my whiteboard out, my dry board. But let's look at this one first. You have at both ends, both spectrums, low rate of adoption, rapid rate of adoption. What is going to determine that in an international market are 6 different elements. The relative advantage that you have in terms of your target country. How compatible are you with your target country? How complex is that market going to be to enter? Can I try this product? Can I test it? Am I able to communicate it through the channels, through the promotion channels? And what is going to be the relative cost? And so these are going to be the 6 elements. And as you can see, based upon how these are assessed will determine which way you go. Because at one end of the spectrum, you have a low rate of adoption, and those are obviously things that may deter you from entering that market. Product life cycle. You all have seen this. This is on the next slide. From marketing, I always say you can remember it by saying IGMOD. Introduction, growth, maturity, decline. 4 cycles. Now, there's a such thing called the international product life cycle, which is slightly different. And what that does is it tracks a product going from the country that created it through all the other countries that receive it, and what happens to that product as it goes through the international life cycle. Now, this product life cycle that you see here, and this is the same one that's in Principles of Marketing. You have the introduction stage, you have the growth stage, you have the maturity stage, and you have the decline stage. And of course, your sales begins to pick up in the growth stage, and it levels off as more competitors come into the market and compete. Then there's a maturity, and then there's a decline. While the product is in the decline stage or in the maturity stage, you want to continue to make some improvements so that that stage is sustained over time. Going back, they have product elimination. That is a formal written procedure to determine which of a firm's products should be dropped. Many companies do not have formal product elimination programs, which may be true, They put together crash programs when products get into trouble. Now, I must say that in your marketing book, if you took principles of marketing, you would not have used this book, because this is the first semester that we're using this book. But I just want to read to you this idea when they talk about product elimination. And they say that many companies do not use a formal model, but there are models. There's what is called a product deletion process. And those of you who are taking principles of marketing now, if you can go to page 358, you'll see product line review. So you look at the whole product line and you look at which products may need to be contracted or phased out. Deletion analysis. Why is this product being phased out? Are there any good qualities left? Can it be adapted a little? Can we change the packaging? Can we do something to the product to make it the perception different? Then you make the decision. Do you delete it? Or do you return it to the product line in an enhanced way? If you delete it, how do you delete it? Do you drop it immediately? Do you run out? Which means that you will continue to run the product based on its strengths that you perceive, or do you just phase it out evenly over a period of time? So that is the product deletion process. And again, this is from Principles of Marketing. I've shown you the diagram so you can refer to it. But certainly, those are things that you have to consider. I have also included the international product life cycle, again, which is a slightly different model. Where to locate research and development facilities. And I think it's really case-by-case basis. Having one facility in the home country reduces R&D costs and exerts more control and coordination over the R&D program. Advantages to having one facility in the home country and one or more additional facilities in foreign markets. The multinational corporation has access to foreign scientists and engineers, which may be cheaper. And not only that, when you talk about new products, you may have resources that may be more plentiful and that may be cheaper for production. New products developed overseas are more likely to be attuned to the firm's overseas markets. There's a very interesting phenomenon that happens. Take a fast food company like McDonald's. They have outlets in over 115 countries, maybe 120, 125. And they often get ideas from overseas, things that they see, perhaps menu items, or just ideas. Maybe it is the ambiance and the way the McDonald's appears on the inside, selling cappuccino, different types of foods, maybe even having a coffee bar, which is McCafe, selling cappuccinos just like you would have in a Starbucks. So these are the types of ideas that are actually brought back to the United States for implementation. So again, you have some very interesting exchanges from the foreign office to the home office, and of course, vice versa. Product counterfeiting. There's a video that I typically showed in my marketing class on counterfeiting. And we know what counterfeiting is. We've seen it at football games. We've seen it probably in our cities that we're from. And we may have even unknowingly or knowingly participated in purchasing counterfeit goods. because they're cheap. You have someone at the football game selling all of Beyonce's song on one CD, or selling any number of artists, or giving you a DVD of the latest movie. In fact, some movies are still at the theater. I remember years ago, I was at the football game and I was looking around and I see this guy selling DVDs, and he was selling a DVD of a movie that was still at the Governor Square Mall. And I was thinking, wow, you know, this is straight upfront bootleg. That's what we called it. Bootleg CD, and you're selling this thing for $5, and probably going to make a pretty good margin. But guess what? That is against that person's copyright, and so there you have that particular law. So you have to obviously be sure that your property is going to be protected when you go into these markets. Of course, advertising is going to be very important. Personal selling, your outlets. Which outlets are the most popular depends on the country. Is it billboards, which is true in many places? Billboards are the main source of advertisement. You have taxi cabs, buses, you have the signs on the side, you have obviously e-marketing, you have television. Radio is a very common media, a medium in many places. Satellite radio. And so what is your media mix? What is it going to be? What is the percentage? Is it going to be 60% billboard? Is it going to be 10% magazine, 10% newspaper, and is it going to be 20% internet? How will you break it down? Or will it be 40% billboard? Will it be 30% internet? Will it be 20% mobile and 10% print? It's up to you to make the calculation as to how you distribute the revenue based upon the media that you're using and the demographic you're trying to reach. Personal selling is considered very effective in international markets, but there is a high cost per contact. We know what personal selling is. This is more the face-to-face, pressing the flesh, convincing people, selling these products, and ensuring that they understand what the product is, how it works, and the benefits that it will give to the customer. In the book, they also mention a very important concept, page 299. They talk about magazines. Now, okay, magazines are not going to be the top choice for media planning, but in many countries, still very important. In fact, I like to show magazines that I purchased from overseas because I think it's very interesting to compare and contrast. But they have this concept of magazines, vertical publications versus horizontal publications. So you have vertical publications that are targeted at a specific industry. So you have general industries, you have Forbes, you have Bloomberg, you have perhaps you would go with Wall Street Journal and the other publications, Fortune, Business Week, Bloomberg Business Week, I meant Fast Company, Entrepreneurship. These are all vertical publications. But then you have horizontal publications which deal with a specific job in an industry, whether it be something like Brand Week, which is dealing with brand management, or when you deal with when you talk about salesmanship, there are lots of magazines on sales. There are magazines specifically dealing with procurement. And so these are magazines where you can reach the audience based upon the type of industry that you're targeting. Sales promotion, again, these may change from country to country. Publicity, you have to be careful about what type of publicity you do and the humor that is used in some of your ad campaigns and your public relations. And you also want to make sure that you're a very good corporate citizen. So your publicity is to help firms to prospect for new customers, paves the way for sales calls when favorable press release is sent to prospects ahead of sales calls. Again, the PR, making sure that you have a good face. And maybe you hire locals to be the face of the company. Favorable stories provide objective, unbiased, third-party endorsement for a firm. If you do corporate social responsibility, that may help you get to the point where you have that positive press. And of course, your channels of distribution. Channel is what it suggests, the length of your supply chain going from procurement to distribution and then support services at the very end. So you're looking at which channels, how long is your channel, how many nodes are you going to have in your channel from the manufacturer to the buyer? Are you going through retail? Are you going through wholesale, retail, another retail, and then consumer? Are you just going from manufacturer to consumer, or are you using just wholesalers? What is going to be the structure of your supply chain or your distribution channel? Is it going to be physical? Is it going to be virtual? All good questions. Okay, so for this channels of distribution, we have indirect and direct strategy. And indirect strategy are those methods that you're going to use that have already been charted in your home country that you seek to use in other markets. So it says uses existing distribution channels to market products and services. So this may be the export strategy. And of course, you can use different methods once you get the product to that foreign market. You can use distributors, you can use agents, intermediaries to carry your product. Then you have the direct strategy where you bypass existing channels by using marketing and sales offices located in foreign countries. So this may be through we talk about foreign direct investment, or you talk about buying a company in that foreign market, 51%, in which you can now route your products through that channel so that you can have a lot better chance of succeeding by using an existing structure, but then moving your product through that supply chain, and thus maintains control over marketing efforts. You have a number of different types of distribution agents, which connects buyers and sellers, and distributors, which sell on the behalf of a manufacturer for obviously at a discount. Then you have physical distribution. Lots of different challenges when you talk about physical distribution. Most notably, developing countries, you have to look at the road system. You have to look at the traffic. When I was in the Manila, Philippines, 8 o'clock at night, I was out and we were actually driving, I think, to the hotel. And there was another night that I was just walking in Manila, and it was the traffic. It was just like a parking lot. It was 8 o'clock at night, and it was a parking lot. And I was thinking, this can't be. This traffic is horrible. And what we found out in Manila is that they did a very poor job of accommodating the growth of the city and did not do a lot of, when you talk about city planning and laying down the public works projects, the expressways and the roadways and all of that to take pressure off of the main arteries, then that was something that they admitted that perhaps they didn't plan as they should have in terms of the road system. So that traffic was just brutal. And I felt it, and I was merely just a visitor. So it was something else. So when you go to these countries, you have to look at that. You have to look at the distribution channels. You have to look at the types of distribution channels. Is it going to be roadway? Is it going to be using alternative methods? Is it going to be, you talk about people using kiosks in different locations? Is it going to be a storefront? Is it going to be hiring somebody on a bicycle to take your goods to point B if the road structure is bad? Are you going to use scooters and motorcycles? These are all options. Or are you going to have people selling your products on the street? Probably not, but that is another way that products are moved in a lot of these developing countries. You see these street vendors moving back and forth selling these products. How can you get your products to point B? You can use freight forwarders. We talked about time versus cost. So you're looking at your product, the type of product you have, whether it's perishable or whether it's non-perishable, is going to determine what mode that you're going to use to get there. If it is a perishable product, you may need to do one or two things. You can use a faster route, or you can somehow package your product in a way that it is preserved in getting there. So those are also options. Containerization. You've seen these containers on ships. They're stacked up. You've seen them on back of trains. You've seen them on the back of a 18-wheeler. The cargo is what makes it an 18-wheeler. And you've seen these trucks taking cargo across the highway. And then you have intermodal transport, which is you're trying to figure out the most efficient way to get your products from point A to point B. So the first leg, you might use a sea cargo. Getting to the port, you get to the port, a truck comes, and they get the products from the seaport, take them to a distribution center. In that distribution center, they have these couriers that are on motorbikes and that will take the products to their destination. And so you have intermodal transport, which handles that. Now, I'm not sure if, many of these companies will say, okay, well, this is the best way is the motor scooter. You would have to have a mighty small parcel, but you would be surprised when I was in Vietnam, some of these motor scooters had big bundles of merchandise that they were carrying. And I don't know where they were going, probably some business, but I mean, these are huge, huge bundles that they're carrying on these motor scooters. So that is perhaps a reality that you can have that as part of the relay race of getting your products from point A to point B. I'm going to begin to wind down. We talk about pricing objectives. Of course, we have to look at the bottom line. That's why you're over there, right? You're over there to make a profit. You're there to provide a product. You're there to provide a service. And you will look at these as these in the supply chain. The supply chain has to be optimized. And when the supply chain is optimized, then these pricing considerations have already been taken into account. And then here you would have the idea of how that product is going to be assessed going forward. And here is a measurement looking at net profit, return on investment, market share, market penetration. You look at prevention objectives, preempting the competition by perhaps making the product more expensive. And after having a subsidized product, you've gotten a grant, you've gotten a low interest loan, you've got technical assistance coming in, you can price the product lower, which preempts competition from coming in because they can't compete. You're also looking at things like developing those supplier relationships, tying up the best suppliers so that your competition can't get in. That's another way of doing it. Setting prices, maybe use the law of one price. Law of one price is that if it's $2 here, it's $2 everywhere else. You just adjust the exchange rate. If your currency is $1 to 2 units of theirs, if it costs $2 here, it's 4 units there. If the exchange rate is $1 to 50 units, if it's $2 here, it's 100 units in that other market. But you may have to make some adjustments depending on your target segment. Maybe the economics will not allow you to keep that nice parity, and you might have to go down a little bit on the pricing. Of course, demand conditions are also very, very important. So here's what I was talking about, law of one price, where you can have different prices, gray markets, and dumping. Just simply dumping means that you're bringing products over and you're undercutting the locals on price. Gray market goods are very different. It reads here, unauthorized importers selling a product in the manufacturer's domestic market for less than the manufacturer sells the product in that market. So you have a lot of different markets. You have your traditional markets, you have your black markets, which tend to be totally illegal. You have unauthorized importers. Now that product is authorized to be in that country and distributed, but you might not have a license to do it. And so that becomes a gray market because while the product is allowed in that country, you have others who are not authorized to deliver it. Dumping, again, is this idea of selling a product at a price below the market average. Then you have transfer pricing, as you're dealing with subsidiaries overseas, selling them products that they will resell. So you have to account for the differences in exchange rate. I didn't realize this until I went to a conference and there was a professor who gave a talk on the military, and he talked about how the military hedged. They use hedging strategies because they're operating in and out of different currencies. And I didn't think of that until I saw that presentation. Arm's length price, a price that the overseas market is willing to pay or price that is customarily paid for the transfer product in the overseas market. And that can be a lot of things. That can have to do with what stage that product is in the product life cycle in that country. What can be in the decline phase here can be in the maybe introduction stage in other countries. So you have maybe a different price strategy. When the market is saturated and prices decline here, the price is lower. In other countries, there's a scarcity, so prices are higher. So you have some variation there.
Now, another in our series of reports on the rise of China as a global economic power. Tonight, a look at a vast market that appeals to many companies, the Chinese consumer. The NewsHour's economics correspondent, Paul Salman of WGBH Boston, has the story.
Shanghai's trendy Bar Rouge, where the bartender mixes drinks with Vegas-like showmanship, and the customers are as cosmopolitan as the cocktails.
We live in a modern society now compared to 20 years ago, where China was completely, sold up, right? We have McDonald's and we have KFC and we have Pepsi and Coke. Of course, young people are going to love and enjoy these things, right?
After decades of cliches about a billion thirsts to quench, the Chinese global consumer, it would seem, is here at last, starting at the top.
I bought it in '91 and renovated it.
American Handel Lee, restaurateur, art dealer, Shanghai's first Armani franchisee. A typical global investor who's targeting Shanghai's high-end shoppers.
We're going for the top 5%.
And how many people is that?
Well, in Shanghai, according to our numbers, it's about 860,000 people.
There's almost 1 million people in Shanghai who can afford stuff like this?
Absolutely.
Now, even if that's not an extravagant estimate, it would still mean that 15 million people in Shanghai alone, and more than 1 billion Chinese in total, can't afford stuff like this. A Marni label outfit around $2,000, twice the average Chinese annual income. But the point is, it seems to be no problem for mainland fashionistas. Chinese consumers now scoop up 12% of the world's luxury goods, mostly when they travel abroad, compared to 17% by U.S. consumers. And yet not long ago, almost everyone in China dressed exactly the same.
The blue Mao suit to Marni. Now, it's quite a journey.
Lee's women's boutique, where even the dressing rooms are theatrically upscale. A barbershop where Celine Dion serenades the clientele. This is how China's top 5% can afford to shop. The next 30% can go to Walmart. Because it's mainly reachable by car, and there are still only 10 million cars here, about the number the U.S. had around 1930, Walmart caters to China's upper middle class, those who average about $10,000 a year, which goes roughly as far as $40,000 in the U.S. Fewer than 30% of Chinese may actually earn at this level. We remind you, amidst all the city glitz, that more than half the population is still rural, but less than 25% of all Chinese is still more than the entire population of the United States. Nearly identical to its U.S. prototype, with employee enthusiasm matching anything back home, Walmart has 48 stores in China. Will put up a dozen more before the year is out. At the chain's newest supercenter in Beijing, the head of Walmart Asia, Joe Hatfield, explained how the world's largest corporation views its fastest growing market.
It's the one place in the world that you could recreate Walmart all over again.
Why?
Because of the population base and the growth and the income levels.
To see how Chinese consumers increasingly go west, just look at cosmetics.
We started out with 4 foot of skincare. Today it's 20 feet. Today we don't have deodorants, but someday down the road we will have deodorants in China. 5 years ago, perfumes were not a big business here, but if you look today, it's an emerging market.
Even sales of dairy products are booming, though most Chinese are lactose intolerant.
If you came to Shanghai or Beijing 4 or 5 years ago, you would have seen about 25% of what you're seeing today. This market has just exploded.
Exploded may be apt, given the symptoms of lactose intolerance and a new issue in China, eating too much in general.
They drink more milk, they eat more bread and snack crackers, and they eat more meat in their diet. There's a lot less bicycles, so that takes away from the exercise side of it. So the size of people are getting larger. So what's that tell you? Exercise equipment's getting good, exercise wear, jogging outfits, and at some point we'll have Slim Fast and all those type of products.
Slim Fast in China. But while Walmart may be spurring Western-style overconsumption for those relatively few at the top, its style of merchandising may have benefits here. Criticized in America as leading a race to the bottom, Walmart in China could be leading a race in the opposite direction.
First, the price is good. Second, the environment is good.
They wear a smile on their face.
They give us directions and help us define the things we need very efficiently.
This supermarket is modern and cool.
It's also clean. Its meat section, for instance, features workers in masks to guard against disease.
It evolved a couple years ago when we had SARS, and there's a lot of focus been given to food safety and cleanliness and sanitation, and the customers appreciate it.
So apparently does the Chinese government. Hygiene has long been an afterthought for Chinese businesses. Grocers, for example, still use fans to scatter flies. So the government can point to Walmart as a model of modernization.
They hold us to a higher standard than others and to set the expectations for others to follow.
Cleanliness, convenience, and opportunity for today's workers and those of tomorrow.
In a store like this where we'll hire 500 to 550 associates with opportunities to grow. When I joined the company, I started out as an assistant manager and a store manager. How would I have ever dreamed 30 years ago I would be doing what I'm doing today? And I think we give tens of 15,000 people each year those opportunities to grow.
Before, as peasants, all we faced every day was fields and vegetables. Now I get information from all sides and I can develop myself. That's the difference.
My goal is to become district manager in 1 year and manager of all Walmart in 5 years.
Do you hope to be Joe Hatfield someday?
I'd like to be his boss.
There's the same can-do spirit in Walmart's book section, where customers take their inspiration from the likes of Dale Carnegie and his How to Win Friends and Influence People. A made-in-America philosophy in a store whose goods are almost all made in China. Still, as with so much foreign investment here, the vast majority of the poor are out of the picture. And Walmart's low-price policy forces Chinese suppliers, says labor activist Han Dongfang, to treat their workers badly.
They make these subcontractors compete with each other, against each other, and Walmart just sit here and see these people biting against each other, and they're bleeding, and then they get the lowest price. It's based on exploitation of Chinese workers.
Meanwhile, Walmart itself has reportedly yet to turn a profit in China. The underground parking garage in Beijing was conspicuously empty. Plus, there are regulatory headaches galore to undermine the efficiencies of Walmart's famed centralized distribution system.
We have to buy produce locally from the countryside. We have to buy liquor locally. We have to buy tobacco locally.
A mile away, Walmart's local competition, the giant Chinese chain Walmart, takes a more traditional approach to wooing the urban consumer. Walmart subcontracts to local services, like this barbershop, and fills its supermarket settings with traditional Chinese sights and sounds. What does he say?
That's the price. That's the price.
Oh, he's shouting out the price.
Yeah, Chinese people still, we like this kind of atmosphere. It makes people feel very excited.
And, says Walmart executive Su Ying, so does the sale of a kilo of eggs, especially popular with older consumers, 11 eggs for 30 cents, and the bargain tables. Most items a dime, top price 60 cents. She put that one back and is looking at the other
just compare the other, see if there's any small problem, check the quality. From the face, you can see they're very happy.
Here too, though, global marketing is having an impact on some of the world's pickiest shoppers. Do you go to Walmart and see what they're doing? Do you check them out?
Well, we do. We could also send our staff there and then compete. If we are regarded as a competitor, direct competitor of Walmart, that means we are approaching that level, the world-class company level.
So, do Chinese consumers want to become westernized? No, says ad man Tom Doctoroff, head of J. Walter Thompson's Shanghai office. They want to become modern while remaining emphatically Chinese.
Chinese believe fundamentally in the superiority of the Chinese worldview. The one thing that has unified China, despite wars, despite emperors falling and dynasties rising, is the Chinese worldview and a belief in it as almost a religion. It's almost spiritual cohesion. So people don't want to become Western. People think that Western is a dead end. What they want to be is international. What they want to be is modern.
So Doctoroff puts a Confucian spin on, for instance, his Nike ads in China. They seem to stress Western individual, but it's never outside the group.
Individualism in China, it's the illusion, okay, of being different, of having a better, smarter, cleverer way, but it always has to remain understated within the context of a social barriers of a Confucian society. One thing that, is interesting about Chinese youth is they're very ambitious. They want to show up in front of their peers, but because it's not truly an individualist culture, they show off but in an understated way. So the tone and the manner of these is very quiet, and then the joy and the showing off and the peer endorsement happens. So Chinese don't want to define themselves independent of society. They want to, as individuals, climb up a very regimented social hierarchy.
Doctoroff applied the same insight in a Chinese diamond ad.
This is a fundamentally different ad than what you'd see in the West. A diamond is forever. In the West, it's really about sex. This is really a commercial, not about romance, but about commitment. The man ties a red string to the woman's finger. The Chinese have a belief that two people, because of fate, are born with a red string attached to their intended, the person they're meant to be with.
As for you PBS viewers who think fewer ads in general might not be a bad thing,
Advertising is about profit, and profit is good for capitalism, and capitalism is making China move forward.
it's an argument that upscale young Chinese have now begun to buy.
We've always heard that Chinese like to save, not spend money.
Mm-hmm.
That true of your parents?
Very much so.
And you?
I spend ahead of my earnings.
You spend ahead of your earnings.
Yeah,
Is that true of your friends as well?
I think so. It's true of all young people.
Millions upon millions of new Chinese consumers then, globalizing in their own way at a dizzying pace. Yes, they're a tiny fraction of the total. More than 1 billion Chinese could never afford a drink here. But at the rate China has been changing, it could become, with its own peculiar twists, the world's largest market someday, perhaps someday soon.